Hi, Paul Nashawaty coming to you live from Open Source Summit 2026. We're here to talk with the Valkey Project with Madeline and Jacob. How you doing?
We're doing delightful. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for being on. So let's start with, let's tell the audience a little bit about Valkey, what it is.
Yeah, so Valkey is an open source project. It's a key value database underneath the Linux Foundation, the namesake of this conference that we're at. And it was originally created by me and a couple of other engineers when the Redis open source project decided to change their license from a open source license to a proprietary license. So I was part of the Redis open source community at the time. So I got together with a bunch of other engineers who were working on Redis open source, and we forked it into the Linux Foundation. Okay. And then Jacob here was one of the early major contributors to the project, and he kind of eventually became a maintainer through hard-earned contributions. So that's sort of the history. It's been about 2 years. So the original license change happened in March of 2024. So we actually recently celebrated our 2-year anniversary of having the Valkey project.
Well, congratulations. I mean, that's awesome. It's 2 years in motion. 9.1 came out today. The keynote was awesome. Saw a lot of that traction there. Tell us a little bit about 9.1. What's going on there?
So 9.1 actually came out yesterday, but
sorry, my bad.
That's fine. So 9.1 is an incremental minor version release. So it's primarily focusing on basic improvements in security and infrastructure. So the highlight features that we've been talking about are per database ACLs. So Valkey historically had access control systems around basically like key prefixes. So Valkey is a key value database. But it also has this concept called numbered databases, and there was no access control on that. It was kind of deprecated in the Redis open source days, but it's made a resurgence with Valkey, so we added some access controls on that. We also built some new multithreading improvements. So Valkey has a vertical scalability, so you can like add cores to make it go faster, and so we improved the vertical scalability of that with like a new I/O queuing architecture. And then we also made some iterative improvements in the memory efficiency. One of the other big things that we want to talk about is that we also added full text search as sort of like a first-class citizen inside the project. Do you want to talk about that, Jacob?
Yeah, so for a little bit now, we've had vector search capabilities inside of Valkey, but we just added full text search, which will allow you to take some of your workloads from things like OpenSearch, Elasticsearch, and consolidate those into Valkey if you would like to. We are able to do it pretty fast in-memory searches. We support text search, numeric search, tag, and additionally the vectors, so you can get like a vector search while also filtering on tags and text.
All right, so this is interesting. To me, it sounds like there's a lot going on. You've done a lot of work here to bring it together. What is the lift of, say, if somebody is trying to just kind of get into Valkey and try to use it and figure out how to use it? Is there a big lift to get in, or is it can they move their existing projects that they're currently working on? How does that work?
Yeah, so Valkey is compatible with the RESP protocol, which is a commonly used protocol for caching and key value databases. So if you're using Redis or Dragonfly, there's a couple other databases out there, then you could just lift and shift over, and you can continue to use the client that you had before. That it should still work. If you're interested in getting integrated with it from a net new workload, I think the API should be somewhat easy to use. It starts from a simple set and get, but you can go into more complicated ones, as we talked about, vector search, text search, stuff like that. But from its very core, we support, it's a very simple key value lookup style API.
So what are some of the key advantages? You went in kind of into a lot of technical depth there, which is really cool. But what are the key value propositions? If I'm just looking at it from a higher level, I know open source, right? If I'm trying to migrate, maybe modernize from a heritage system to a new system, what does that look like from a business use case? How does that use case look?
Yeah, so we think the key value proposition for Valkey is really to help improve the efficiency and performance of existing legacy systems. So the traditional primary use case for Valkey is key value caching. So let's say you have a slow SQL relational database in the back end. You'll cache some of those queries inside Valkey and then serve, if you see repeated requests for the same queries, you'll be able to serve that directly from the cache. Increasingly, we're actually seeing, this also apply to more modern systems like with agentic LLMs. Right, the foundational models have the same properties that we saw SQL in the olden days, where they actually take a long time. They're very expensive to do. So we have a new functionality which we call like semantic caching, which is trying to take the traditional KV caching and apply it onto these similarity searches. So two queries might be similar, like what's the weather in Minneapolis and what's the weather where I am right now, Minneapolis, and you can basically serve the exact same LLM response as a result of that. And so that's powering some of that vector similarity search that Jacob was just talking about, in addition with full text for like contextual awareness. So those are like the main use cases. We really want to help reduce the costs to enterprises by making their systems more efficient. And it's also used a lot to make the systems faster if you want real-time queries to be served to your end users.
Yeah, I see that a lot with business use cases. A lot of people looking at modernizing, they want to improve the performance of their existing databases. The heritage databases that they're using don't have that same level of performance. Plus, they want the ability to shard the database and split it and grow and scale and do all the pieces that they're not basically enabled to do today. But one of the big things that I also see in the modernization side of it is when you're looking at modernizing. Organizations are kind of a little bit resistant on moving from their existing environments. They're like, hey, this is my system of record. If we touch this, it might break. And a lot of times they'll use like new systems of engagement and that are read-only. They'll use that to access those systems of record. Would you advise the audience here to say like, hey, if I want to move to this new modernized approach, what's the new way of doing it without having to break what you currently have?
Yeah, so when we see a lot of enterprises do that modernization, they'll typically take their existing database and whatever it is, they'll just lift and shift it to the cloud or lift and shift it. If they're running Postgres, maybe they'll probably move to Postgres in cloud. But if they're on something like Oracle, maybe they might move to Postgres. There's a lot of tooling to make that migration easier.
Yep.
But typically, Valkey is something you'd add on top of that, right? Caching is by definition pretty ephemeral in nature. So if you have if you have a cache already for your on-premise system, you typically can kind of just delete that and then move to the cloud and then regenerate it in the new system.
Okay.
So it's actually usually easier to move a cache to the cloud or to modernize it than it is with a relational database that you really that's the source of truth of the data.
Yeah.
You can't lose that.
That makes sense. So, all right. So let's talk about what's next, right? So Valkey 10. What's happening with Valkey 10? What's the next generation look like?
Right. So yeah, we're actually very hard at work on sort of building out what we want for Valkey 10. There's going to be a couple features which are coming down that we're very excited about. So traditionally, Valkey's replication system, so you could have primaries and then read replicas of that primary data. That was built on top of a Linux fundamental called fork. So when a fork happens, the process basically gets duplicated, and any modification that happens basically causes extra memory to be used in the process. So we're basically building a mechanism that doesn't use fork, which is a long way to say we're going to make it significantly more memory efficient to add read replicas.
Okay.
So that's one of the big features, and I'll hand it over to Jacob to talk about some of the work he's doing.
Yeah, on the clustering side, we've been looking a lot at how we can redo clustering to be more correct. Historically, Valkey has definitely lended itself, CAP theorem, it's been more in the AP side of things than the CP side of things. So trending towards availability over consistency. But we've seen a lot of people asking for consistent operation modes, durable operation modes, so that they don't lose the contents of what's in Valkey when something happens. Because of that, we've been looking at upgrading the clustering system to use something like Raft, like a well-known distributed system algorithm to make it provably correct when we make important state transitions about like who is the leader of the shard. And then as a kind of ancillary part of that, we wanted to potentially support, we'll see how close we get in 10.0, support like a synchronous replication mode where you can synchronously replicate from a primary to a replica, because today everything is asynchronous. So you may lose a few seconds of data on a failover, which for caching workloads might be okay, but when you start to use Valkey as your primary database, it's usually not something you're willing to stomach.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot to do in a short period of time, right, with the next generation that's coming out. So that's pretty exciting. What are the top 3 things you want the audience here to walk away from that's coming out of the show? Let's start with you.
Yeah, I would say Valkey is something that is very accessible to everyone. Like you can add it to your stack. I think people would underestimate all of the different things that Valkey could do. So that would be my top one. Number 2, I would say to keep an eye on Valkey, see where things are trending. What you previously thought about Valkey Redis caches may no longer be true in the next few months to years. And then I would say finally to look at your stack and consider how consider what elements of your stack maybe are proprietary, because things are moving very quickly in the open source, and if you're not running open source, you may be left behind.
Yeah, customer choice seems to be the talk of the day. Anything to add to that?
I just want to add that you should definitely be using open source projects that have strong vendor neutral backings like the Linux Foundation. And if you're interested in contributing to a project, what I'm holding in my hand is a Valkey contributor coin. So if you come and commit to the project, you too can have one of these nice shiny coins.
Oh, very cool. I thought it was a little Easter egg to be found in the video.
Wow, we made it explicit.
Very cool, very cool. Well, thank you for your time today. This has been really great. Really, congratulations on your successes as well.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for watching. Paul Nashawaty coming to you live from the show floor at Open Source Summit 2026.